So I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think Seas Around Us is important to the aspirations and work of a global conservation organisation such as WWF. We have about 500 people around the globe working in ocean conservation in about 63 countries. So we're truly global, and we have been working with Seas Around Us, with Daniel, with Dirk, with Deng, now particularly for the last few years, and I want to talk a little bit more as we go forward about why I think it's important that we develop this relationship and evolve it as Seas Around Us evolves. But there's three concepts that are really important, if you remember nothing else about this talk that I give today, that are really important. The concept of transparency and evidence and the importance of that. The concept and the importance of speaking truth to power. And thirdly, the importance of communities, coastal communities and small-scale fisheries in ocean health as we go forward. You know, I took off from Brisbane yesterday and it was quite stormy. I don't know those of you who know Brisbane, but you take off, if you're coming this way, you take off over a bay called Moreton Bay. And I was sitting there looking down at that, and it was quite bumpy and cloudy, and the visibility was bad. And every now and then, though, you break through the clouds, and because it's 10 o'clock in the morning, you get this brilliant view of Moreton Bay, and it becomes all clear. And I was sitting there thinking, I thought, this is very much like fisheries in many ways. You're often dealing with very limited information, you're flying blind periods, and then every now and then you get flashes of insight. And when that happens, when you see that, it's important that you seize that and you build on it. And I think that's how I find the information. I found the information that Seas Around Us has provided over the last few years, as we've been working out what our priorities are, where we need to focus in terms of fisheries, and then some of the insights that have come forward from Seas Around Us that previous speakers have explained, and Jessica in particular and Raina were talking about. They're real beacons that help direct how we prioritise our work. When I was appointed as the chair of Queensland Fisheries, I was quite young. I will age myself as well, Raina, here. But in 1994, one of the first things I did was go through the information. We had new legislation. The legislation was quite good, it was quite powerful. It spoke about the need for a precautionary approach. It spoke about ecological sustainability in fisheries. It was quite state-of-the-art fishery legislation. But I remember when I looked at the information that was available in the organisation, most of the data sets, for instance, trawl data sets started in 1988 for bottom trawl. Reef line really was just starting then, probably 1990. Gillnet was not broken down. The shark fishery, for instance, was not broken down by species. In other words, we had very, very coarse data. And I called in the senior managers at the time and the fisheries research folks from the Department of Primary Industries. And I said, looking at this, and I'm just about to have my first meeting with the Minister, and I'm about to go before a parliamentary committee, I think what I should be saying is, at best, we don't know. We don't know what the situation is with Queensland fisheries. And this was my introduction to the culture of fisheries management. There was loud gasps around the room, and the comments were, but you can't say that. We're the experts, and if we're the experts and we don't know, then how does that make us look? Industry will go berserk. The Minister and the public don't want to hear bad news. These were some of the comments that came back. And it really taught me a lesson that so much of fisheries, and I don't just want to pick on Queensland fisheries here, I mean Jessica did a pretty good job of picking on Australia before, I thought, so I don't want to exacerbate that anymore. But that's pretty much a story, and this is in the developed world. This is in places, you know, the US is similar, Canada, as Jessica was saying. There's this facade around we know what we're doing, and that's dangerous. It's really dangerous, and we don't like to say that we don't know. And I mention this because it's part of why the work of Caesarianus is so critically important. And it has been over the past 20 years. It will become more important going forward. I think it was around 96 or so, I'm not quite sure. The first time I came across Daniel Pauly I was in the audience. We used to have these World Fisheries Congresses. I don't know if they still exist, do they? They do?
Next year will be in Adelaide.
Adelaide, right. Well, I should try and get along, but they were funny gatherings because everyone spoke the same. There was no problems in the world, in fisheries. We were on top of it. We were going forward. We had the technology, we had the know-how, we had the political will, we had the legislation, nothing to see here. And this guy, Daniel Pauly, stood up and said, essentially, look, the data sets, the information that we've got is so paltry that we really don't know what we're doing. And the data sets that we do have, the global ones, are really highly inaccurate and don't capture the real situation. And I thought, wow, here's someone who dares to stand up in this culture of there's nothing to see, there's no problems, and actually talks about the problems. So that was very. I then mentioned to a couple of the industry guys who were there, and fisheries managers and so forth, scientists, that gee, I thought that talk by this guy Daniel Pauly was really interesting. You know, he spoke about what we don't know, rather than trying to make out that we do know everything. How refreshing! But I was quickly told that he was troublesome and could be quite grumpy, and really not someone that you could be engaged with if you wanted to have a long future in fisheries, which I'd worked out at that stage that I did not want to have a long future in fisheries. But it was true, yeah. No, the grumpy part was true. But I thought, you know, it was very important that that people like Daniel, and there's not enough of them, do stand up. We heard Jessica do it as well. Do stand up and talk about openly what we don't know and what the deficits are in terms of our knowledge. Still today, in the realm of fisheries management, it's so often the fact that it's camouflaged, the reality is camouflaged by a thicket of arcane language and jargon, hiding crucial truths from people who might otherwise care or act. And I know this is a difficult task, but people, the public, if they're uninformed, and we're talking about Australia before and we talked about Canada, if people really don't know what the situation is out there, it's very hard for us as terrestrial beings to understand the true situation in the oceans. And I remember a few years ago when I was on a thing called the Blue Ribbon Panel, which was a World Bank group, being in Bali, and we had a full day meeting. At the end of the day, we went out onto the veranda of this hotel to have drinks. The sun was setting down over the bay. It looked idyllic. I dived that bay probably 6 months before that. It's completely dead, completely eutrophied. You saw very little, there was no fish over that big. It had been a fringing coral reef. But the people who were there were all commenting about how beautiful it was. And it really brought home to me how difficult it is to get across to people that what's under the water can be quite different to what it looks like on top. And every year, you know, we see hundreds of thousands, millions of people travel from Northern Europe down to the Mediterranean to enjoy essentially areas that are highly degraded. The water's clear, the biodiversity is essentially gone, so diminished. But for most people, that's still okay. So we have a real challenge getting across the fact that that the oceans are degraded. This is where the work of Caesarianus, and I think Caesarianus does a good job. If you look at the documents that it edits, I'm not sure who's actually responsible for this. I guess Daniel and Dirk and Deng can all take credit for it in the team, but they're very good at articulating. They have a real knack for constantly posing and seeking answers to questions in the print, and ways that I think journalists find interesting and relevant. And you'll see that time and time again. The right research questions at the right time, it's no small feat. And I think it is why the program has stood the test of time. and why I publicly supported its importance to ocean conservation on the global stage. Seas Around Us has described trends at scale, which is clearly appealing to the serious end of the media spectrum. For the likes of WWF and others in the room involved in public advocacy and which have a global outlook, this kind of analysis is tremendously useful. Now we're entering the real danger zone for planetary and ocean health. The IPBES report couldn't have been clearer. At WWF, we've been reviewing our global conservation approach to make sure that we're having maximum impact. And I've been talking to Daniel, to Dirk and to Dean over the last few years and following the work of Seas Around Us closely to see how it can inform our approach. And as we're about to embark on an external review of WWF's fisheries work, which is about 50% of our oceans work, we'll be turning to Seas Around Us experts and information to help guide us in terms of prioritising what our action should be and where we need to be focusing our work. We of course work across oceans from the high seas to the coast. And just last week you might have seen that we got heavily involved in the yellowfin Indian Ocean Tuna Commission discussion on the yellowfin tuna. The Indian Ocean Tuna Commission again failed to commit to rebuild yellowfin tuna populations. So we work to leverage the power of markets and seafood buyers, and we're currently advocating a series of significant reforms to ensure that the Marine Stewardship Council can play its full part in conservation in the future. So we were one of the parents, together with industry, of the Marine Stewardship Council, and Daniel was heavily involved back at the start of it. But we are not just going along on the ride for that, because we believe this facade that I was talking about that creeps into fisheries all the time is beginning to play out there. So we're seeking some significant reforms, and we're working together with Pew and other partners to make sure that MSC is as accurate in its analysis and the work that it puts forward on certification of fisheries. We're working across IUU, but I'm also convinced that much of the challenge is with legal, regulated and reported fishing activity, and IUU can at times become a distraction. It's not to say it's not important, but I think we all like to beat up on bad guys. We hate to actually focus on the fact that many of our legal fisheries are not sustainable. I just want to speak a little bit at WWF. We're pivoting much more, as I mentioned at the start, towards the importance of working with coastal people and their communities in ocean conservation and particularly small-scale fisheries. And we're asking ourselves some hard questions, and I'd be keen to involve the scholars and the analysis that sees around us in answering some of these questions. When we talk about fishing sustainably, sustainability for who? When we talk about fisheries improvement projects and certification, improvement for who? Coastal community or biodiversity and people's lives come together most immediately. What's of most interest to me is how the data and the analysis that Seas Around Us provides can practically inform, as I said, where and how we work. And we need to do this over the next 6 months. Given the size of the challenges, we all need to carefully target our work based on types of and what this information provides. You may have seen last year, I think, and this was a major, I think, breakthrough for WWF in terms of the Living Planet report, which is produced biannually, that on oceans we normally relied, I think, on FAO information, particularly in relation to fisheries. But in 2018, we asked Seas Around Us to do the analysis, and we relied on that information. I think it gave a much greater focus on the intensification of fishing and the spread of fishing and the implications for fisheries. We did cop a bit of criticism from people saying that this was telling too negative a story, but I'm happy and confident in the information that Seas Around Us provided. We'll be doing it going forward, hopefully at the next Living Planet report on the same basis. There's so much in these maps, but one of the main messages for me is how much fishing in the near coastal areas has intensified. Whilst this intensification represents the full spectrum of activity, from large scale to industrial to artisanal, it is my strong contention that the sheer size and role of small-scale fishing has been a blind spot for far too long and must be an area of considerable importance and focus in the future. It is in the poorer and fast developing parts of the south and east where the tectonic plates of biodiversity loss and human aspirations for development are crushing against each other most aggressively. And therefore it makes sense when you consider people living in the coastal communities represent about 40% of the global population, and that we need to focus increasing efforts in achieving sustainability in these places. These are the regions where coastal communities are expanding and where fish for food and livelihoods is a mainstay and under threat. Developing countries are home to 97% of the world's fishers, of whom 90% are engaged in the small-scale sector. I just want to repeat those numbers. Developing countries are home to 97% of the world's fishers, of whom 90% are engaged in the small-scale sector. What the map doesn't show yet, and that's because it's showing historical trends, not seeking to forecast, is that coastal East Africa is a region to watch closely, we believe, and where our food security crisis is rapidly looming for coastal people. Coastal natural resource depletion, fish and habitats, combined with rapidly growing communities and climate change. This is a perfect storm that we have building there. When you look at the demography, I think there's something, I won't get it correct, so don't quote me on this, but there's something like 40% of the population are under 25 years of age. The other area that's we're watching closely and we'll be asking for advice from seas around us on is the Northern Indian Ocean. The area basically from Iran, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Myanmar. That area is an area where there's increasing pressures developing quickly. We have an ambitious target at WWF to work with partners to double the number of sustainable fisheries over the next 10 years. Some people may say this is folly, but unless we're ambitious, and I agree with Jessica here, the next 10 years are going to be the years that we're going to make the difference. And I'm hoping that in 10 years' time, we'll be looking at a very different approach to our oceans than what we're looking at today. We need to break down the institution and the cultural barriers between conservation and fisheries management. I believe a people-centred approach looks past artificial and too often ego-based barriers that create so much delays, needless friction and avoidance. I want our work and with our partners to be guided by the analysis that seas around us can and does generate. The ocean and the people who depend on it need the seas around us more than ever. It is my hope to be able to formalise the relationship in the coming months to one of a close, mutually beneficial partnership between WWF and seas around us. And I want to use what capacity I have and my team has to help raise resources for the seas around us work going forward. Not everyone wants to hear what Daniel and the team and seas around us finds. That only makes your work here much more important. To show us all what's really going on with our oceans. I cannot emphasise enough how important this role is. And I see here in the audience many young people, researchers, postdocs, PhDs, as well as, I guess, some undergraduate here. And I just want to say to you that you need to understand that the work you're doing has meaning in the real world. So work has virtue. It has more virtue if it's applied to dealing with real world problems. So I congratulate you on your engagement in the seas around us effort, and I'd encourage you to maintain that. And if you leave, as you must leave at times, then be ambassadors for this work of bringing transparency and evidence to the understanding of fisheries around the world. So Daniel and team, congratulations on an impactful first 20 years, and I'm wishing you all the best for the future.
Happy anniversary on this most special occasion. It is truly an honor to be able to share with you my experience in engaging the Sea Around Us project and its team over the last several years. The relationship started probably several years ago around a campaign led by Oceana in Belize, and they were a new outfit the sea around us had lent support to the campaign by, starting with thinking through the science. What was of value in terms of the marine ecosystem in country, and how do we help to build awareness of the value and the asset that the country was blessed to hold. And the Sea Around Us project led this process of what I call data repatriation, and really combing and consolidating all the science and the research that had been done over very many years, 50 years of research, quite frankly, hundreds of researchers published on this issue, but none of that information was nestled in country, or known in country, or valued in country. And so it wasn't impacting policy. There was little awareness socioculturally about the wealth or assets of the country. And so that process of data repatriation was profound. It consolidated, and it manifested in a major convening, a symposium of all these scientists who were called back to Belize to share their findings, to elevate, distill, and boil down in simplistic terms the wealth of that country. And it was incredibly profound. I mean, eye-opening to see that, this treasure was right in our backyard. And we had a certain pride, but this really cemented the reasons we had for feeling proud about our reef. And that process not only was one of repatriation, but it was one of empowerment, in that in the process of calling people to come and share, the group uplifted two national entities in a profound way. Obviously, Oceana, as a campaign type NGO, they were new. They had a brand and a name to build, and they had to, gain legitimacy in the local context. And just the process of, bringing knowledge to the fore, breaking it down for locals to understand, to connect with the households, that elevated Oceana, helped to make it a household name, and helped to make it a brand that was recognized as being connected, rooted in science. It's not wishy-washy fly-by-night group. These are solid people with tremendous backing, reach, and competency for bringing the best science knowledge to bear on an issue. They simultaneously uplifted the national university, the University of Belize. Very young, small university, very new natural resources management program. All of that research that was done was not done necessarily in partnership with the national university, nor was the findings nestled at that entity. So that students and policymakers, students and the lecturers could help to convert or translate some of the research to formats that could guide policy. And what Sea Around Us did was really help to connect the major researchers with the national university. Cooperation agreements were forged where existing research findings was nestled on a database hosted by the university, made open source, and made immediately available for students' use and for academia to convert to policy. So to really elevate these national universities was refreshing, and it rings through to the ethos of building partnerships, building capacity internationally, and really leaving an empowered infrastructure to continue to do that kind of work and to be the center pull for future research, which is important if you're really hoping to build camaraderie and build a spirit of true and meaningful collaboration. And then perhaps the most important for me, or the third noteworthy variable in how they approach the work, is really perhaps a personal attribute and a style of Daniel. In the engagement, I vividly recall him carving out time to go to the primary schools and, into the inner city, and, the schools that none of the A-listers ever visit. These are poor inner city, very often people of color, and immigrant population in country, getting the leading scientists who they're seeing on news come into their classroom to tell them his personal journey and to share with them the joys of marine conservation work and the pleasure of being a scientist, and helping people to see that they too can decide on a path that's meaningful and fulfilling, notwithstanding where they're from. And that's incredibly powerful. I know for me, as a Black woman, I beamed with pride, and I was deeply moved by that gesture. And it makes me feel a little bit more confident and assertive in my own undertaking, knowing that there are others who went before who were well received and whose work is well received. So I think that approach of really going to the roots, being willing to share and empower others, is a hallmark and a style that's truly commendable. And I uplift you and celebrate you for that, Daniel, and the team for that. And so it then became very easy. I'm now based in Geneva, and we had to really think through the investments we would make around small-scale fisheries at a global level. And it was easy. The ethos, the approach, the creativity for thinking through finding the solutions to research, to address issues such as data gap in small-scale fisheries, which everyone makes seem impossible. There was this willingness to innovate, to be creative and to partner with local researchers, data gatherers globally to be able to fill the gap that's not ordinarily found in other entities. And so it was truly a blessing to be able to support the Sea Around Us project for its global efforts on fisheries and data collection, and helping to build an understanding of what's happening with our oceans. And so, on behalf of our trustees, Christian, and the board, and the family, I just really want to congratulate the Sea Around Us project for its mark of distinction, for its excellence, for the heart that they bring to the work and the respect that they bring in their engagement, international engagements especially, for the credibility, and just for the good grace in everything that they do. Love you guys, respect you guys, and uplift you on this special celebratory moment. Toast, cheers to you all. Wish you 20 more years of wonderful success. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much to the Sea Around Us to participate to this anniversary. Thanks a lot. And I would like also to warmly thank the French consulate that made my participation possible today. So thank you very much. Knowing that I'm not part of Sea Around Us, so I will have some kind of an outside view of what you are doing. And first of all, let me congratulate you for all the good work that you have been doing. And this is an inspiring work for us from outside Sea Around Us. But I would like to say more than that, and that's to congratulate you for something that is even more important than your research. That is because you have been building, for me, an incredible, unique, and a structured scientific strategy to tackle, the global challenge we are facing today. And I think that's one, because you are a bit modest in Sierra Leone, but you have been building this incredible strategy, and in fact, something like a new field of strategic research, and I would like to call that that's the conclusion of my talk, some kind of a global sustainability science. And I think that's a major contribution of this 20 years of hard work. So my presentation is on why we definitively need, today, and maybe more than ever, a global sustainability science that we have been developing in this Sierra Leone project. Let me start with generalities. Of course, we live in a full world now, terrestrial and oceanographic world, and this was, and during the last 30 years, scientific topics have been changing, and you know that we have many problems today, and the world is transformed, and we have never experienced before at a global scale, the global level. Oceans are hot, acid, overexploited and polluted. And 20 years ago, that was not so obvious that it will become, a global incredible challenge in this. We have, at the UN level, the SDGs, the Agenda 2030, and of course you have the SDG 14, and of course the ODD, the SDGs, this is some kind of a universal agenda, this is some kind of a utopia, but we need a vision for the future, and without it, without a vision, you always end up somewhere else where you don't want to go. So there will be soon a report by the 15 experts of the SDG, and after 5 years of activities, a report with key messages. It will be published in end of September. And the report will mention 4 main conclusions. First one, it's time to sound the alarm. So that's, I was talking about the global challenges, and they are absolutely key, and the urgency of the topics. Better focus on the arrows and on the boxes. We have the SDG 40, but there are many other SDGs, like SDG 1, which is poverty, 2, which is food security. We have, of course, the climate, which we are in Sierra Leone, you're working a lot on that, but also inequalities, SDG 10. The third conclusion of the report will be mobilize $1 billion and shift $1 trillion from the private sector. And here we need to mobilize everybody, and particularly the private sector, where the trillions are. This is for if we envisage, a transition, ecological, economic transition, we will have also to tackle this issue with the private sector. And after that, promote sustainability science. So I'm going to start and to review a bit of those 4 conclusions, starting with all the reports that we have in hand now. Reports, the GO6, we have the IPCC, we have the IPBES report, we have all kinds of reports, and in fact, we are not going forwards, we are going backwards. We are going backwards in terms of malnutrition, in terms of inequalities, in terms of overfishing. We are going backwards in terms of loss of biodiversity. And we are all, yes, we can formulate that like that, we are all countries that are looking for sustainable development. And in fact, this plot, you have no countries that are achieved a level of well-being in an ecologically sustainable ways. And sometimes you have countries claim that they are doing better than the others, but in fact they are, and like the map that Daniel and his group produced on the footprint, in fact, they outsource, their environmental impact. The other issue that will be for this urgency of the agendas, that's inequalities. Because in fact, the idea is that increase inequality, you see that plot, that was a basic idea that you, at the beginning, when you get richer, you increase inequalities, but after that, it decreases. So that was some kind of a plot like that that economists used to work on. But in fact, this is misleading, and inequality reduction and poverty are strongly related. Here you have what happens, and in fact, all the growth you see is going to the top one, because top one of humanity is captured by 27% of total growth, and you have 50% that capture only something like 10%. So SDGs, I was talking about that. There are some relationship, and we're working, of course, on SDG 14, but what I wanted to stress that we have also other SDGs in society and economy, and we will have to tackle that. And when the conclusion of this report is saying that we better focus on the arrows than on the boxes, with the ocean, we will have to tackle all those SDGs like inequalities, I was talking about that, about SDGs on hunger, on food security, on poverty, on climate. And this promotes, new topics in the ocean that are important and that you have been tackling and in the sea around us, and that's maybe what we are doing when we are doing those global sustainability science. This is, for example, when we talk about marine reserve, we can link this SDG 14 with climate. How marine reserve can mitigate and promote adaptation to climate change. This is some kind of topics. This is some kind of topics that your group has been addressing, like linking SDG 13, that climate and fisheries, extreme events or warming, how it modifies, and it links to food security. Some other also more subtle links that and I'm going to start working on this one. This is how to link, for example, extreme events in Peru. You have El Niño in Peru, and El Niño with climate change is becoming more frequent. And it has an effect on the fish meal market, which is Chinese fish meal market. And as there's a decrease in the fish meal production, China built 41 fish meal factories in Mauritania and Senegal. And today you have a major food problem in Senegal because of this report of fish meal market in Africa. So now women who used to have access to this fish, to dry it and to send it for food security in all African countries, in Mali and other countries, because that was very cheap food, are not doing that anymore. So you see that SDG 40, you can link that with food security, with inequalities, access to the fish, and of course with climate change and extreme events. So time might change, but I think the role of science is key, and this is why the sea around us strategy, scientific strategy, is so important. I change. I put that because that's fun, and because but when you read what happened during this, that was the age of enlightenment, and you see that's Diderot and D'Alembert in the 18th century. But that was a very interesting period where science, you see, there were plenty of fake news or irrational news or knowledge, and they were fighting against that. And that was, in fact, to put science the goal was to put science knowledge at the center of public decision. And that's really what we are aiming to do now. And we have a great example like the IPCC, IPBES, the IPCC report on cryosphere. And this is to assemble all our knowledge, for policy making. So that's some kind of a new role of science to inform and disentangle, very complex issue related to climate change, to loss of biodiversity and renewable resource. So, and I think we won't reach SDGs without this integrated knowledge like you did in the Sierra Leone. Because otherwise, without scientists, what would you say today? We are 43 degrees in Europe. What would you say? You will say it's hot today, not. So without science, we won't tackle, and policymakers won't tackle those complex issues. So, so policy design, implementation, and monitoring will be supported by excellent research, strongly evidence-based knowledge and tools. And what you have been doing, that's also to do this sustainability science, global sustainability science, that is to address, more objectives that's, you see usually in science, you have thematic science. But now we will have to tackle all those major challenges that we are facing. So what I wish you is to continue with the Sierra Leone to develop, this approach, and that is a very inspiring approach that is focusing on global challenge and that is addressing, all those SDGs, that is to make the world better. Thank you.
So I am indeed directly from the airport here. I came from Washington to be with you today because this is such a wonderful and important, you guys are so important. And I did not want to miss being here at this anniversary with all of you. The task of getting here was a little harder than I thought it would be. I spent the night in Chicago and so forth. So, anyway, you guys all travel, so you know what it's like. I've just been through one of those drills, but I am so happy to be here. I wanted to start by saying, we're standing in a country that for all of its history managed its oceans without any loss until last week. The entire history of Canada was one where the fishery minister was told, good luck. Hope you manage them well. There were no standards. There was nothing in the law that instructed him or her, you know what they usually were, on what his duty was to the country, what his duty was to the science, what his duty was to the future, what his duty was to the ocean. It was just a discretionary gift to whatever party was in power. Last week, for the first time in the history of the country, a law was passed in Canada which mandates that the Canadian oceans be managed according to science, and that when fisheries are collapsed, they have to do what? Establish a plan to rebuild it. This is what's called scientific policy making. This is what's called scientific fishery management. And guess who is essential to that prospect? The Sierra Leone project. You don't do that, you don't get that outcome, and you don't implement that law unless you have the kind of science that's in this room. And you don't even get the idea of doing it unless you have the science that's in this room. So think about that. Think about what that means for the future. Scientific-based policy making is now going to become a real thing in Canada. Canada used to have a fishery that was ranked in the top 10 in the league tables of the world by its productivity. It's now fallen at least 10 slots. You could look to a future where Canada could be back where it should be. If you're me, and you have a job of trying to create globally productive oceans, you really need a scientific partner that's got a global perspective. And you need a scientific partner that's taking a systematic view of things and not just falling in love with one creature here and another creature there, or falling in love with this beautiful place here and that beautiful place there. You need a scientific partner that's thinking systematically and analytically about the whole resource, the resource of the global ocean. And guess what? Almost nobody does that. And the Sea Around Us project makes it look like it's easy. You guys know that it isn't. You do it so well that you make it look like it's easy. And the rest of the world still is trying to figure out what you do. And still trying to measure up to this kind of a standard. It's a very, very essential thing that the Sea Around Us project does. I came to ocean conservation, as was mentioned, about 17 years ago. I was lucky to be introduced to Daniel and to the Sea Around Us project on my first days, basically, in ocean conservation. So I learned to expect that what you do was normal, and only slowly began to realize that it's exceptional. And that, you know, most of ocean conservation in the past had been run in this kind of ad hoc way, as I said, where a scientist would fall in love with a particular creature, and then that creature might get some attention from the policymakers, or a scientist would fall in love with a particular place, and then that place would get some attention. But it wasn't rigorous, and it wasn't systematic, and it wasn't globally those things. So, hallelujah for you guys. Oceana has now got 200 or so significant policy outcomes, not all as significant as passing the national fisheries law, as we just did with our allies here in Canada. But we have lots and lots of victories that are nationally significant in 9 countries now: the European Union, Peru, Brazil, Mexico, United States, Philippines. I can't name them all. And in all of those, I think there was probably some connection to the Sea Around Us. I mean, I haven't gone back and proven it to myself, but that would be my strong hypothesis. And so you guys should feel that you're making a real difference, because you are actually connected to policy outcomes at the national level in big fishery countries all over the world. We do science-based policy making, science-based advocacy, and the science on which we stand, much of it comes from right here. So thank you for that. And I vividly remember, and I'm going to tell a story, it violates the rules of board confidentiality, but I will tell it here because we all know. So it was my second board meeting as CEO, Oceana, 17 years ago. We were a brand new organization. We had launched 3 campaigns. One of them was a pollution campaign against Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, which was dumping sewage at sea, and had previously been convicted of criminally dumping sewage in the Miami harbor, and the board had come in and fired all the managers and put a new team and said, we're going to be really, really brainy. And we went to them and said, okay, you have 3 of your ships working in Alaska that have an advanced wastewater treatment system on board that purifies the water before it goes over. We'd like you to put that system on every vessel and just do it as they come into dry dock, but we want you to stand up and make an announcement right now that you will do that, so it's public, you're publicly committed. And they said, great idea, that's a really wonderful idea. You know, we really love the oceans, we care a lot about this, and we're going to work hard on this. And we said, okay, great, when are you going to make the announcement? And they said, well, we're working on it. And we had that conversation for about 6 months. And at the end of which we said, please don't take this personally, but we really need you to make the announcement. You're not making the announcement, so we're going to go into a public campaign. We're going to pressure you. But about a month later, all of our board members at their homes received a letter basically laying out the case that they were going to sue Oceana for libel for saying false things about their company. And it was the night before our board met, and I was at my second board meeting, pretty new as the CEO, didn't know the board very well. My general counsel and I go into executive session with the board. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Daniel's there, some other board members are there, and there's a big discussion. Because the board members, a lot of them said, you know, the fishery management stuff's a lot more important than the pollution stuff. I didn't join this group to like be spending the next months and months answering a lawsuit. Let's just give in, go back to fishery management, forget about the pollution. And other board members didn't know what to do, and there was a debate, and I was saying, as with my general counsel, I think we need to fight this, but I'm brand new. Discussion goes on, and then I remember, I had never forgotten. Daniel, you said, when I joined Oceana, I knew I was joining an organization that was going to defend the oceans. But I thought I was joining an organization that would be a watchdog, not a lapdog. He won the vote. We fought. We won. And we established some credentials, which we needed to establish as an organization that would be taken seriously. And that was a really, really big moment. And I'm here to tell you that if Daniel hadn't spoken, it wouldn't have gone down that way. And everything good that I think followed would not have happened. It's an example vivid in my mind of how one person saying the right thing at the right moment can really make a big difference. Really make a big difference. I want to say two other stories about you, Daniel. One is we were in London at a board meeting right after Donald Trump had gotten elected. You've heard of him. And we were all a little bit in shock. Our guest speaker was George Monbiot, the famous writer for The Guardian. And he spoke to us about, he had written a book called Feral, I'm sure a number of you know, interesting guy. And he says, I'm at the end of the table and he's up at the front, and he's talking away. He's very, very entertaining, very smart. And he says, you know, there's this thing called shifting baseline. And one of my board members, the TV actor, Ted Danson, movie actor, looks over at one of my other board members, Christian Parker, who then looks over at Daniel, and they do that little, like, you know, that's you, Daniel, little signal, you know, you can do. It's like a board member signal. And the smiles are, very modest smiles are exchanged, and Monbiot sees it. And he wakes, he sees this little board thing going on, and he suddenly says, "Oh my God, is Daniel Paulding here?" And then he says, and we all say, "Yes, yes." And he says, "I've died and gone to heaven." True, right? I'm not making this up. True story. So the last story, and there of course could be more, was in the dealing with the president that we now have. We've already forgotten his name. And in all of the defense that we have to do of core laws that protect conservation in the United States of America, there are moments when people get discouraged, right? And there was another board discussion where basically people were asking, board members were asking each other, are you optimistic? Are you optimistic? Are we going to win? Can we handle this? Can we defend our laws? Can we defend the Endangered Species Act? Can we defend the National Environmental Protection Act? Can we defend the core Magnuson-Stevens Act that manages our fisheries? Can we defend these things? Can we defend our oceans against oil drilling? They propose to drill for oil everywhere in America, in American oceans. There's a little bit of a discussion, and then Daniel Pauly says, that's not the right question. Says the only question is, what are you going to do? We're where we are. Doesn't matter how you feel about it, whether you're optimistic or pessimistic. What are you going to do? It's the only question that matters. You're entitled to your emotions, but they're not necessarily productive. What are you gonna do? I'm elaborating a little what they just said. But it was really exactly right. And it was one of those moments where we needed it said. And, you know, the world gives us these moments, unfortunately. Not just the United States. It's happening in Europe. It's happening in Brazil. Might be about to happen in Peru again. It's happening in the Philippines. We need to stand up, and we need to stand up for scientific policy making. And sometimes it's hard, but it's always easier thanks to the sea around us. And I want to be very, very, very clear how grateful I am for all the work you do, and I hope you have another wonderful 20 years. Thanks very much.
Note to self, never speak after Andy. Good. Okay, so I think my plan, there's so many good stories we already got through, was to talk a little bit about some of the specific things that we've used Sea Around Us data for, just so that you know what we're up to, and then talk a little bit about the global context setting work that we do, and how that's helping us inform the things that we're thinking about moving forward. So Andy already talked a bit about our work as a science-driven advocacy organization that works on campaigns. So, you know, we fight to change things. And we spend a lot of time thinking about what campaigns we want to do, what's the specific policy change that we want to see happen, and there's a lot of different choices of what you could choose to work on. You have a limited amount of resources, so how do you get sort of the best return on investment? So much of the information that you all created here helps inform some of those particular decisions. This is just a screen cap of our website, which I didn't realize Andy's going to be standing behind the whole time, but yeah, this is what we look like here. Just so you know, the Restoring the Oceans could feed a seafood meal to a billion people a day. We use the Costello et al. 2016. Just for the scientists here that might care. So Imani already mentioned this, but we have an office in Belize. When we were early in our history there, we were working on trying to stop oil drilling, or trying to prevent the possibility of oil drilling in the Belizean Barrier Reef. And so one of the products that you all were responsible for was Too Precious to Drill. So this was something that Deng and Daniel edited, and Imani already mentioned this, so I will click through quickly, but there was a media events, there was a large-scale mobilization of the community of the Belizean people against this. It took a very long time to get done, but it was the articulation and the convening and the collection of that information for the first time that allowed these sorts of conversations to happen, and led to ultimately success for Oceania and for Belize. The other thing that we've used Sea Around Us data for is as we think about where we want to move, countries that we want to expand into, looking at the sort of the current state of play in the fisheries in those countries. And so this is just one example. Mexico's our most recent office. We opened a little over a year ago there, but as we were doing research into the state of Mexican fisheries, we used the catch reconstruction data and other Sea Around Us data to prepare this report called to Protect Mexico's Fisheries. This was the pitch. This was the proposal, and the screen resolution isn't good, but there's actual somewhere in here, maybe right here or over here, is actual Sea Around Us data, and so as a result of this, we were able to open up an office in Mexico, and we've already had some pretty amazing progress there just in the short amount of time that we've been there. So those are two specific examples of ways that we've used Sea Around Us data in campaigns. Of course, I can't not mention the catch reconstruction data. We've used this in general communications, in setting the stage for global conversations. We've presented some of the catch reconstruction data in our individual country offices. This is Daniel at the Luxent in Manila. talking about that. That's Mike Hirschfield, my old boss, the chief scientist at the time. And we've also blogged about it. We use it in conversations with the media, so we try to set sort of a big picture context about these conversations, because as much as we use the science for the individual campaigns that we choose to work on and figuring out what the policy changes that we want to see, it's these global big picture images, which is what drives what captures people's imagination, what drives them to engage in the topic. So we have a Save the Oceans, Feed the World framework, which Andy already described, but this is just the cover of the brochure, which is also chock-a-block with other data from you all. So as I think about what makes you all special, it's that you are fearless and you are open and you are like an icebreaker behind which so many other scientists seem to follow. It's really hard to put yourself out there and try to answer questions, which a lot of people say, oh, you can't answer that question. We don't have the data for that. And you're fearless. And that's an incredibly valuable trait, and it's a little bit scary, and I'm so incredibly happy that this group is here and doing this work, because there's so much that we couldn't do without it. One last thing I wanted to mention is there's a paper that came out about 26 years ago, and it's called Being a Scientist Means Taking Sides. Mary O'Brien, she's a terrestrial ecologist, she published this in Bioscience. And I refer back to it a lot as I talk to scientists like you all, as a scientist working in an advocacy organization, what it means to do this kind of work. And I refer to her paper a lot because she's an academic scientist, but she talked about what this means. And the opening sentence of that paper is, once you're a scientist, which means as soon as you systematically ask questions about the universe, you are taking a side. And I think what you all are doing here is you are taking a side. You are thoughtfully choosing the questions that you are asking and how you want to answer them. And that's really important. So don't forget that. Please keep doing it. And thank you so much.